Hello, and welcome to another episode of the High Danger Hockey Podcast. My name is Emma Miller, and the Florida Panthers are your 2025 Stanley Cup champions. So today we're going to look at a couple of things that really set the Panthers apart in this Stanley Cup Final, and we're also going to talk about the future of the Edmonton Oilers. Where do they go from here in order to actually get over that hump and potentially win the Stanley Cup next season? So we've got plenty of topics to discuss today. Let's get right into it and talk some hockey. Are we entering a Florida Panthers dynasty? Second straight Stanley Cup victory this year, after losing to the Vegas Golden Knights in the finals in 2023. So that's 3 straight finals appearances, and general manager Bill Zito deserves all the praise in the world for what he was able to do with this roster this year. You know, obviously they had a great team last year, of course, as the champions, and they made some big changes during the offseason last summer that really paid off. And one of those additions that they kind of took a chance on and it worked out really wonderfully was Nate Schmidt. Now, he had just had his contract bought out by the Winnipeg Jets not long prior to that, and he comes to Florida on a deal worth $800,000. And Bill Zito really saw what he was capable of, and Nate Schmidt played really well in Winnipeg at times, especially under Paul Maurice, who was the head coach of the Panthers, of course. So reuniting those two guys together really brought Schmidt to a level that he was previously playing at, and we hadn't seen from him in a couple of years. He was struggling for a bit there, and although he was playing some limited minutes on the third pairing usually, Nate Schmidt made the most of every second of ice time that he got, especially in the second half of the season and then heading into the playoffs, and he really was just flying out there during the Stanley Cup Final. He had 5 assists in just the first 3 games, and he looked really strong as far as his offensive abilities go. He was making long stretch passes that were right on the tape that were resulting in goals. He set up Brad Marchand for one of his several goals during this series, and it was beautiful. Schmidt had the puck on the left point, and he was patient with it, and he waited for the lane to open, and he made the smart choice to go ahead, sauce that puck, 50 feet across the zone, and found Brad Marchand, who hits the net. So he really made a difference for this team, and he was a signing that was maybe a little bit risky in the eyes of some people, but Paul Maurice and Bill Zito had faith that Schmidt could return to the level of play that we've seen it earlier in his career, and he did exactly that. And of course, I mentioned Marchand. What a wonderful addition at the trade deadline for Florida. He fit the needs of that team perfectly. And not only did he have that massive overtime game winner, but he played extremely well. He scored in all situations. He skated in all situations. He became the perfect do-it-all guy for the Panthers. And he left a struggling Bruins team where he was, one of their go-to guys, especially after Bergeron retired not too long ago. Marchand was really the go-to. He played so many minutes, every single situation. And in Florida, he played a role that he hadn't in a long time with the Bruins because he was one of their top forwards, but he was really well suited to that third line role, playing with Anton Lundell, and adding that depth really paid off for the Panthers. And that's something that the Oilers did not have, was the same level of secondary scoring and the same consistent, reliable forecheck from the guys lower in the lineup, like a Brad Marchand. And of course, we have to mention the play of Sergei Bobrovsky, who in my mind was a very realistic candidate for the Conn Smythe. He had a very phenomenal playoff run this year, and even in the finals he played well, although he allowed a lot more goals during this series than he did previously. You saw the Oilers score 4 goals, 5 goals, but especially in the last 2 games of the series, that 3rd and 4th win for the Panthers, Bobrovsky made some really timely, impressive saves that really carried the team to victory in a way. Of course, they're being led by these offensive powerhouses like Sam Bennett, who led the entire playoffs in scoring goals. and it earned him a Conn Smythe win for that. But once again, that's something that really set the Panthers apart from the Oilers, was getting those important saves at big moments in the game that really could have swung momentum in Edmonton's favor. Bobrovsky just stonewalled it. And we even saw that at the beginning of Game 6, where in the first few minutes to open the first period, the Oilers came out the gates really hard and heavy, and they were attempting to get as many shots as possible on Bobrovsky. And he actually looked a tad bit uncertain at times. There was one or two saves in those first few minutes there where he kind of was looking around for the rebounds, not exactly sure where the puck had gone. But he's hunkered down, he stayed focused, and he remains calm, cool, and collected, and almost pulled out a shutout victory in the Stanley Cup clinching game. So hats off to Bob for yet another solid playoff run. Well-deserved recognition here. So if I had to sum up what the Florida Panthers did right in this playoffs, it would be number one, relying on their superstar forwards. Alex Barkov produced at almost a point per game, Sam Bennett over a dozen goals, Sam Reinhart 4 goals in Game 6. But they really balanced that by having those guys in the lineup that could produce in a shorter amount of ice time. And finally, they have an elite goaltender to shut the door on the back end. And not only that, but they had the physicality to really command play in both zones. I feel that besides having those superstar scorers, the Oilers were really lacking in all of those areas. So it raises the question of, what does Edmonton do now? Where does Stan Bowman take this team? Because we have Connor McDavid entering the last year of his contract here. He can start renegotiating a contract extension on July 1st. And while it's hard to imagine him playing with anyone other than Leon Draisaitl and the core that he's really been playing with his entire career, we've seen some insane trades in NHL history. Of course, the trade that sent Wayne Gretzky to the Los Angeles Kings. It's not out of the realm of possibility that McDavid gives the Oilers one last chance and says, I'm chasing that cup. I want to be somewhere where I'm going to win. So while I don't necessarily think that's the most likely outcome here, I think there really is added pressure on the Oilers as an organization to give McDavid the pieces around him that it's going to take to win. And they really should be taking a page out of the Florida Panthers playbook. And that brings us to Edmonton's financial situation, which isn't looking the most optimistic right now. They've got under $12 million in cap space headed into the offseason, and that's not a lot of wiggle room. That's not a lot of room to play with, especially if they're going to sign McDavid to an extension, especially if they want to bring back Evan Bouchard, who's a restricted free agent and in need of a pay raise. And I feel that there are a couple of ways that they can and should free up a couple $1 million to play with headed into this summer. And first and foremost, they've got to do something about Evander Kane. And that's tough because he's making $5.125 million annually. This is the last year of his current deal. So now is the time to shed his contract. And I don't think that's going to be an easy feat because not only has he had some struggles on ice, particularly in the final, he was completely absent from the score sheet. He scored 1 goal in 6 games, and that's not why the Oilers brought him on. They didn't bring him on to miss opportunities, take undisciplined penalties, get ejected from Game 6 late in the game because he just wanted to slash Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, he's a little hot-headed, and he put his team in unfavorable situations by taking silly, careless penalties at different times throughout the series. So he's not filling the role that the Oilers need him to right now. And he makes over $5 million for this next year. And that's not worth it, in my opinion. So they could consider moving him and trading him, but he also does have a modified no trade clause. So he's allowed to submit a 16-team list of, hey, these are the teams that I want to be traded to. But honestly, I think it might be difficult to find a buyer. Insider Elliot Friedman did mention at the trade deadline this year that at least one team was calling up the Oilers asking around about Evander Kane. So it's not entirely impossible that there are still teams that could want his skill set. However, at the price tag he comes at, and with the negative locker room energy that we've heard so much about over the last couple of years, it might not be an easy feat to find a team to take that on. So that then leads us to, should they buy out Evander Kane? And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad idea if they buy out his contract, because the buyout fee is going to be $1.3 million this season and next season. And that frees up enough space to bring in another depth guy on a cheap deal. Or even re-sign someone like Corey Perry, who has said he doesn't intend to retire quite yet, even though he's 40 years old. So you gotta do something about Evander Kane's contract. He's not worth the amount of money that he's making, and him being on the books is actively detrimental for the Edmonton Oilers. And again, like, he's had the potential to be an impactful player. He has a style of game that's really effective in the playoffs, especially because he brings that diverse range of being really gritty and tough while also being able to contribute offensively. But he didn't do that second thing enough. He did not hit the score sheet as much as the Oilers needed him to. And of course, it's not only Kane's fault that the Oilers did not produce as much secondary scoring as they would have needed or hoped, but he is a big part of it. And another contract the Oilers might want to consider moving is that of Mattias Ekholm, who plays first pairing minutes for them. He's a distinct part of the Oilers' game plan, but he's making $6 million this year, and it's also the last year of his contract. So there is no better time to try to trade him than now, and I think a lot of teams would be more interested in Ekholm than they would be in Kane. And Mattias Ekholm is a solid top two defenseman. He is nothing to shake your head at. He's a good addition to have on the roster. Not only did he score 33 points during the regular season, but he brings a tough, physical, kind of shut down two-way mentality that a lot of clubs would really like to have on their roster. And he's capable of playing 20, 21, 22, 23 minutes per game. However, that all comes with a big caveat, which is that he did not play well in the Stanley Cup Final. He was very careless with the puck, a lot of turnovers that led directly to Florida Panthers goals, and he just was not on his A game. And not only that, but he missed a stretch of over a month due to an injury, and for someone earning $6 million that you need in that top two role, Ekholm might not be it anymore. So by bringing up these two players, I'm giving examples of contracts that would feel good to get rid of, and what could they do with that extra money if they were able to get rid of Kane and Ekholm via trade. Here's what I think. I think a forward that would be really solid to target is Morgan Geekie from the Boston Bruins. Now, he's becoming a restricted free agent on July 1st. He is offer sheet eligible, and I do expect that a lot of teams around the league are going to be submitting some offers there for Morgan Geekie. He is the type of guy that could fit in nicely on any team due to his style of play, which is he is very strong on the forecheck, and he's coming off of a career best season where he scored, 33 goals and 57 points this year. But not only that, at the same time, he's recorded 100 or more hits in each of the last 2 years. So he brings a really tough, physical game that would be perfect as a third line, even maybe second line type of player. So I think Geekie is going to get quite a few looks from teams around the league. He's only 26 years old, and he brings a lot to the table, and I think he fits the mold of what the Oilers are looking for perfectly. He provides what Evander Kane could not, and that's consistent offense as well as that disciplined forecheck and that strong pressure to put on the puck carrier, and he wins boards battles. And in terms of contract, Geekie is probably going to be looking at around the same range that Evander Kane currently earns. On the lower end, it could be around $5 million, but that could go up to around $6 million, depending on a team's needs and what deal he chooses to accept, of course. But if Edmonton can shed that contract of Evander Kane, Morgan Geekie is such an upgrade in that role in the lineup. And as far as the blue line, I also think there are several upgrades that are available on the market right now, and the best defenseman available is going to be Ivan Provorov. Unfortunately, I think his price tag is a little bit too much for Edmonton, because he could get upwards of 7.5 all the way up to 8.5 mil on his next contract as a 29-year-old number one defenseman for the Columbus Blue Jackets with tons of potential to continue to grow. I think Provorov is going to be a little bit too expensive for what the Oilers need right now. However, there are some guys that could come on a discount, and I think Dante Fabro is actually one of those. Now, before you start to question, replacing an established, shutdown defenseman like Matthias Ekholm with a younger, still proving himself Dante Fabro, hear me out on this one. I think that Fabro is the best valued defenseman on the market this year. For what he brings to the table, I think any team is going to get a big bang for their buck when it comes to signing him, because he's probably going to make around $4 million on his next deal, maybe a little bit more than that. So that's already $2 million in savings that could be allocated elsewhere for Edmonton should they choose to move away from Ekholm and towards Fabro. And he's just 26 years old. He stepped up into a really big role for the Blue Jackets this season, and with that elevated ice time, he proved himself to be a worthy candidate for a top 4 defenseman on most NHL rosters right now. That $4 million contract is really worth it when you consider that he scored 26 points in 62 games. That's only a little bit less than Ekholm, who scored 33 points this season. And as far as the Oilers' blue line goes, of course they have Darnell Nurse, who's going to be quarterbacking that top power play, but Fabro is a really viable option on a second power play unit, which, again, the power play was so vital for the Oilers throughout the season, and it just absolutely died in the Stanley Cup Final. So is Dante Fabro a perfect one-to-one replacement for Matthias Ekholm? No, but I do think he's a very reasonable option that they could start pursuing, and they would save a couple of bucks on it. Because you have to wonder, is Ekholm going to be in Edmonton beyond this season? I don't really know the answer to that. He's aging. The Oilers are still trying to remain competitive. They have Draisaitl and McDavid in this golden window of opportunity. They don't want to see that time go to waste. And as Ekholm continues to get older and he continues to kind of fall down the opposite side of the bell curve, they're probably going to want to move away from him, and I think it's fairly unlikely that they bring him back when his contract does expire next season. So don't just let him walk. Get something from it now, and dip into the trade market or the free agent market now, as opposed to waiting until March. Who knows what's going to happen in that time? Again, Ekholm dealt with a long-term injury this year, so is he still going to be getting value when it comes to March, the trade deadline of next year? That's hard to say. And unfortunately for Edmonton, something that's going to be a little more of an enigma is their goaltending, because Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard had their flashes of playing really well, and when they faced such a high-powered Panthers team, they kind of both just collapsed. And the problem with each of those guys is you kind of never know what you're going to get out of them on a night-to-night basis. Stuart Skinner could have a shutout, or he could allow 6 goals. You just never know. And Pickard isn't suited for a starting position. He was never meant to be a starter, but he kind of ran away with the gig earlier in the playoffs, and then he got injured, so they had to go back to Skinner. And that's something I've talked about at length, is the way the Oilers' goaltending kind of developed during this playoffs. I find it really interesting, but at the end of the day, this duo was not good enough to beat the Florida Panthers. And the problem for Edmonton here is going to be that the market is very thin this offseason. Jake Allen is by far the best option on the market, and he's also a guy in his mid-30s who played mostly a backup role for the New Jersey Devils. He had a record under 500, although his actual numbers were very good. He had a save percentage of .906. He had a goals against average in the high 2 goals against per game range. So Allen was a really formidable second guy for the New Jersey Devils to have, and that's the role that he's going to continue to play wherever he does go this offseason. And with the price tag of about $3.5 million, maybe a bit upwards of that, that's a very team-friendly deal for a reliable backup who's probably going to start 30 or so games in a season. He started 29 this year. But the Oilers are left asking, is Skinner still our number 1 guy? And that's a big question mark in my mind. So when you look at who's available on the trade market, you run into some problems, mostly related to finances, which is someone like Thatcher Demko is probably available via trade, but he makes an astronomical amount of money for the type of performance he will put up. And the same goes for guys like Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues or John Gibson of the Anaheim Ducks, who have proven themselves to both be skilled goaltenders, but not enough to justify the contracts that they currently have. And with the Oilers pinching pennies this offseason with a lot to improve, that type of guy is not going to fit. They would have to shed a lot of salary cap space, which they just don't have, and I'm sure they don't necessarily want to do. As far as secondary scoring goes, just circling back to that, somebody like Pius Suter is available, but he's probably going to make at least $6.5 million, if not more, next season, and they really need him to play more of a third line center role, and that's not worth it. So something has to be done here to bring in some more pieces that will solve those problems on a budget. And it kind of sucks that someone like Kyle Palmieri re-signs with the New York Islanders, because that's exactly the type of guy that Edmonton would really want on their team. Someone who's gritty, finds the net front, really strong in one-on-one battles along the boards, uses that body to open up areas of the ice, shields the puck well. That's the type of play that they need, that they were really missing during this Stanley Cup Final. So at the end of the day, those are just my opinions of how the Edmonton Oilers can remain competitive. That's my 10 cents, because my 2 cents are always free for you guys. But I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what you think the Edmonton Oilers need to do to remain competitive. Should they buy out Evander Kane? Should they move away from Ekholm? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the High Danger Hockey Podcast. You can find the visual version of this episode on YouTube. You can also stream it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Find us on social media. Follow us on TikTok at High Danger Hockey or on X at High Danger Pod for plenty more thoughts and updates, especially as we head into free agency. Got so much to talk about in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for lots of off-season content. There will be plenty of it. My name is Emma Miller. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care.